How did you get to New York City?
I was born here. I was born in Flushing, New York.
Where were you born in Flushing, New York?
Well, technically it was Long Island Jewish Hospital. Yeah, which is kind of on the Queens, Long Island border.
What was it like growing up there?
In Queens?
Yeah.
It's pretty suburban, but you're very aware of the city. You're very aware that it's right over the bridge. Yeah. So you feel like you're a New Yorker, I think, in Queens. Like you're part of that world.
Yeah. I think I know this too, but do you have artists in your family?
I do. I think really everyone's an artist. And if they could I think like kids are all artists, right?
What do you mean by that?
Like we all are individuals and we think in our own way. And I think we're conditioned as adults to behave and react and like what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. But really inside, we all have a very individual, personality. And that's like what creativity is, I think. And so we all have that inside of us. I think we're all artistic.
Were you always that way?
I guess. I mean, my dad told me that I'm very picky. That's one way of saying it.
Picky about what?
Just everything. Just everything. Food. Where I'm sitting.
Just particular.
Yeah.
Like you know what you want and what you don't want.
Yes. Yes.
Your dad was an artist.
Yeah. I mean, is. Yeah. I mean, like, you talk about success, right? And being an artist is like, does that mean how you make your money? I mean, not necessarily, right? My dad's definitely an artist, like in everything that he does, I think. Very creative.
What kind of art is he involved in?
Making music. He actually made music for the documentary. That was basically all his music. It happened organically when I was over there shooting for Charm Circle, and he started playing music, and that worked out under other scenes. And then he eventually came on as like the composer of the original score of the film.
When did you realize that you might want to pursue filmmaking?
I saw the movie Donnie Darko.
No kidding.
Yeah, when I was like 18, and I was like, I want to be a filmmaker. I want to do that.
What about that movie?
I just didn't understand it.
Yeah. And
I was like, I was writing all these charts and like trying to like figure out like what actually happened. And I just felt like I could go into so many different worlds. It's like escaping reality, but also is reflective of reality. And that just, I don't know, it can consume my mind for sure.
What's that movie about? It's a bit of a mind fuck.
Yeah. Yeah. It's about this high schooler in the 1980s that is basically like on the countdown to the end of his life, basically. But everyone should just see it. And there's a funky bunny. Yeah.
Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yeah,
I have. It's been a while, but I remember it being really thought-provoking and a little weird.
Yeah.
Was that enough of a moment literally to launch you into thinking about your life trajectory in a clear way that now this is what I want to do? It had that much of an impact on you?
Yes. I literally remember I was in college and I was like, I should just do something normal. Like I was actually thinking about becoming an occupational therapist.
Really?
And that's what my mom does.
Yeah.
And I was just like, Nira, just like have like a stable life, make money, just like figure it out. And I was interning at an occupational therapy place and even thought maybe at one point I wanted to be a lawyer, but I didn't like the people I'd have to be around. Though I realize now there's some really cool lawyers. Yeah. But back then. And I just was really miserable, like in these environments, even though I was, helping people, right? Being an occupational therapist. And then I saw a movie and I was just like, I just really want to do that.
When you decided that, was there a major you could move into to focus on filmmaking? What did you do?
Well, Queens College at that time only had like media studies, which is sort of like a real blanket thing. They don't have a specific film program, but being in New York City, I was able to intern at film production companies. And that's really how I learned, What does that look like when you intern? Did you just send an application and show up? Like, what does that work look like? Well, this was a while ago, back when like Craigslist was kind of the way of getting things done. And I would apply on Craigslist, and I just was very ambitious about it. Like I really, made myself necessary at these internships, and it would turn into jobs.
You were particular. You knew what you wanted.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that probably really helped.
I guess. I don't know. I guess.
So you start doing your internships, and then what? How do you get from there? Because I've seen your movie.
Yeah.
How do you get from there to actually creating your own film?
Well, I made a lot of short narrative films before I made Charm Circle, the documentary. And I think a lot of, filmmaking, especially if you're trying to be like a writer, director, is like, you want to say something, but you don't know what you're going to say yet.
Yeah.
And so you kind of are just kind of mining around in the dark, and I think I still am. But like I would do a lot of editing work, and like even like, personal editing work, like editing bar mitzvah videos. And it got me thinking about my own family and how this is a movie I could make right now without needing money, really. And I was like, I think there's probably a story here if I follow this long enough.
What was it about your family that made you think that?
Well, I think you can see my parents are real characters. They're so fascinating. They're so interesting. They're so compelling to me. And at the heart of any, compelling movie is an essential question. You have to be asking. You have to be searching for something. And for me and my parents, it's about like, why do they live this way? Like, why is their house a mess? Because they're so smart. They're so intelligent. They're so creative. This doesn't have to be this way. So where does that happen in time, And I think a lot of people, don't realize their parents are people. Like, you just like kind of grow up with them and they're there, Yeah. And so just like breaking that down a little bit, seeing how they had this life before you were born.
Talk to me about your mom and dad for people who haven't seen the film.
Yeah.
How do you describe them?
How do I describe them? They're each definitely one of a kind. They've been through a lot of hardships in life. And what I find so amazing and worth sharing about them is that they still have like this beautiful spirit about them, and just like really know how to like crack a good joke, and I find that something worth sharing.
Your house, as you mentioned, not your house, I guess, but that because they sold it at the end of the movie.
Yeah, maybe you don't want to give that away.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It is a mess. Honestly, I had a hard time watching some of the scenes because it's like, oh my God, like living that way would feel like death, or that you're living around death or decay or something that's rotting. How do you explain your parents living that way for so long?
Well, that's the movie. That's what everyone's got to figure out. I think the answers are there. You don't feel like you've come to a conclusion with that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. All right, let's think on that one a little bit longer, I think, before I just give an answer. Though I did look up Donnie Darko eventually to figure out what the ending
was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to talk about the lead up to you actually going ahead and making the movie. How much experience did you have before you decided you're going to take a shot at this and try to make your own original content?
Experience in terms of like any filmmaking or?
Yeah.
Well, I made like 3 or 4 short films, like scripted. But I just recently bought my own video camera, so like I could shoot whenever I wanted. And I love documentaries. And I think I just wanted to try. Like it was a 6-year process.
Wow.
Which is normal for docs of like shooting, and like maybe 4 years of shooting and maybe 2 years of post-production, though I was kind of editing throughout that entire time. And what I love about documentaries is that it does come together in the edit. because if you're just shooting life, and it was very important for me to have like a narrative structure, a narrative thread there that I think gives beats to a story. And, just sometimes you can just see it, you just see the story.
Did you need to have a certain amount of financing before you began to do this, or did you literally just take a camera and start shooting?
Correct. Yeah. The latter.
The 4 years that it took you to finish it, did you have an idea it was going to be that long before it started?
I wanted it to be a feature. So, yes, that's like the structure I was going for. Someone did mention to me at some point when I was like pitching it, like, would you do a series? And I was like, no. I just that's a lot for me.
What did you learn about your mom and dad while you did it, and your family in general? I mean, there's a lot of older home movies in the film, and I forget if there's any of them before you were around. There probably was some. Most of them I remember like when you were a little girl, basically.
Yeah.
I don't know if anything comes to mind, but like in your journey of making this, what did you learn about them? I
learned that I can have more empathy and compassion for them, and their struggle, and like not be so judgmental. It's like, New York City is so filled with people, like you never know what's going on behind closed doors, And I imagine that's a lot of people know someone that like whose house is a mess.
Yeah.
And not really sure how to help them, And so I use this film as a vehicle for other people to have conversations, that like they can share. And that's already happened. I know it has. And it feels like such a success because of that, that like this movie is a cathartic experience for some people.
Yeah. I think you already said this, but the real time consumer in making a documentary, am I right? It's in the editing room. That's the hardest part. I'd love for you to talk about what you learned about the difficulties of actually getting this beast done.
Being there in the house was hard, but having a camera made it easier because it made it feel more worthwhile for me to be there because I was doing what I love at the same time, even if it was under very stressful conditions. You can't really smell a movie.
Yeah.
And though I am working on them. I think it's a good idea. Like sometimes they do that, like their art exhibits and stuff like that. But it's just, I don't know. I love the editing process. It's not for everybody. A lot of filmmakers actually need other people to do their editing. And I did have a co-editor on this, which was important because that allowed me to have some forest for the trees and something that was so close to me. But I really love the process. So it doesn't feel hard to me.
And while you're going through this process, how are you surviving in New York? We talked before we started recording about the, financially how difficult it is to make it work here as a creative in general. What were you doing? How did you survive?
Just other gigs, freelancing as an editor a lot. Sometimes freelancing as a director, writing.
And that was enough?
Barely.
Yeah.
But that's the lifestyle.
When you are editing or when you were editing the documentary, do you have like a home office where you do that work? Talk to me about how you actually like the day-to-day logistics of what it took to finish the film.
Yeah. I work from home. And when I was really, really in the throes of finishing the film, I had an assistant editor and I had 2 desks in my apartment and she had one desk with computers and I had the other desk with computers and we'd work at the same time,
And is that quite a collaborative process where you together are kind of finishing it off?
Yes. It's like, she would have like a bunch of very specific tasks to do and I was like in charge of other things,
Once it's getting to the point where it's close to done, I don't know if you were like racing to a finish line to meet a deadline for submissions or how that works, but I'd love to hear what you remember about the end of it and if there was a rush.
Well, yes, there was a little bit. I hate finishing a movie before I know where it's going to be, because then it's like, well, I can still work on it.
Yeah, right.
So, and obviously the post-production process, like color, sound, music, those are all kind of expensive, right? Because then you start needing people beyond yourself to finish a film. And there was like a year or two of like festival rejections, and then we got into Sheffield Doc Fest, which is in the UK, and we had a few months to finish the movie, like really do all those things. And so that was like, yeah, okay, now we do have to finish the movie. And so that went as well as it could, I think, honestly. You know, I got really lucky.
I'm assuming there's an application process that is required in order to get into that festival. What do you remember about that? Was it in your mind like a Hail Mary, a shot in the dark to get in? And then once you get accepted, what happens? Do you go over by yourself? I'd love for you to talk about what you remember about that.
Well, so to put this in context, Charm Circle first came out June 2021. So the world was just opening up. And we didn't even know if we would be able to go to the UK, like, you know, but they actually, that month is like when they opened like the borders, and me and my producer, Betsy, we had to quarantine for 10 days and like take 3 COVID tests in Sheffield before even knowing if we could show up at our premiere.
Whoa.
It was really kind of an intense, crazy time. But we passed all the tests and were able to go to our premiere. And like there was all these rules about like, you know, every 4th seat could be filled, you know, because of capacity rules at the time. So nothing was ever full. But it was still an amazing experience. And it just like, it launched the film. We won the audience award over there. It ended up playing like, you know, 20 something festivals, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
When you're over there in the UK, so you and Betsy went over together?
Yeah.
Is it the 2 of you?
Yeah.
Is the goal typically to get wider distribution when you go to meet people that can help launch the movie? Like, what's a home run when you go to a documentary film festival like that?
I mean, yeah, that's definitely a goal. But it's like a chicken and egg situation in terms of distribution. Like you want to get distribution from a festival, but you also want to be having those conversations for your premiere. And it's just a very like, especially these days, difficult to navigate that. I treated the festival run theatrically as our sort of, you know, distribution theatrically, because it was, you know, you go to these like theaters like all over the world, you know, like that's a theatrical run, you know. It might be 1 or 2 screenings only in those places, but I don't know. I think that's pretty cool.
Is the Sheffield Doc Festival one of the biggest in the UK?
I think they're considered the biggest one documentary-wise in the UK. And interestingly enough, Charm Circle did like kind of played a lot more festivals in Europe than in America, I think. I think they just got it.
What do you think they got that we didn't get?
You know, in America, movies are about passive entertainment a lot and not necessarily meant to be thought-provoking. And it's a commercial business. There is a lot more funding for the arts in those countries where it's just an expansive idea of quote-unquote entertainment.
So more of a culture of fitting your film, essentially.
Yeah.
How did you get into the other 20 film festivals? How did that happen?
A combination of submitting and then just them hearing about the film playing another festival.
When that run was over, I don't know if you had a strong sense of what you wanted to do next, if you knew what would be next for you, if you wanted to focus on more documentary films. But what did happen? How have you thought about your career after that movie since you were done working on it, which, you know, this was June 2021, you said. I'm guessing that went for the rest of the year, roughly, where that was a big part of your couple of years.
Yeah.
How did you wind it down and think about what to do next?
Well, I'm always, which I don't know if this is a good thing, working on many things at once.
Yeah.
And I'm actually in post-production right now on a scripted short film that I shot last year, waiting for a festival premiere. I feel like I'm starting from scratch again because fiction film is a totally different world. It's even more saturated than the documentary world, getting a narrative short out there. So I did that. And I'm also working on a documentary. The Charm Circle is about my family growing up. This project called The Naughties is my family when I was in my 20s. And I filmed these boxing matches between male models and city kids in these Chinatown lofts. And it was like this whole underground party scene that I was a part of. And now I'm following up with everybody now. And it's a really bizarre sort of like art scene, but like just like New York City, love story. And so I'm trying to get that off the ground. Yeah.
Boxing matches between male models or male models and other people?
Male models and usually like kids from the city. Yeah.
Like a fight club?
Kind of.
How the hell did that come about?
So it was the 2008 financial crisis happened. Yeah. And a friend of mine was able to convince this real estate person to let him move in and squat on this like building that was in turnover, wasn't developed yet. And we're able to host all these parties and just like use this space. And it's just when you have space in New York City, you have something you can do.
Do you think you've kind of always had a bit of a spidey sense for weird and interesting stories like this, for example, that you brought a camera to film these?
Well, what's funny is that I brought a camera because my friend who was making these events, like we had such an overflow of people that people were watching from the basement.
Whoa.
And because I worked at this production company that like I was interning, I was able to borrow the cameras and we would live feed what we were doing to the basement so everyone could watch. But no one asked me to do anything with this footage. And but it occurred to me when I was watching another movie once that like I have this movie that I can make around this maybe.
Why were these guys fighting?
Well, there was this idea back then that male models like were kind of feminine and like not as like masculine as other men. And so, but there's also like, it's also about like culture and like class and like, gentrification, there's a lot of levels to why this happened.
Do you typically feel like when you walk around the city, you always have like kind of an antenna up, or just in life in general, for a potential theme, a story that you might want to tell?
I don't think I can really know consciously, but inspiration kind of just like comes to
hits you.
Yeah. And it's just like, you don't know where or when or why. But you know it when you feel it.
Yeah.
And you can't really like be on a mission to find it.
Yes.
It
kind of like it finds you.
Right. You have to be open to it. You have to like always go out there somehow in the world, right? And just be experiencing things. And you don't know like what it's gonna like trigger,
You were saying, I think before we started recording, that you almost became an occupational therapist.
Yeah.
And then you left.
Yeah. I think we did say that in recording.
Okay, yeah. Did you find that when you were trying to do a stable job, a normal job, a job that would have consistent income, that you just knew you were miserable? I mean, I think it sounded like you alluded to the fact that you just couldn't really do it happily. What do you remember about that, about trying to do something else before you ended up doing what you do now?
Yeah, I feel like it's easier to like not understand misery when you're that young. Like, it's like maybe I was like over, experiencing my own feelings. I'm a very sensitive person. That's always been true. I'm picky and sensitive. But I think when I discovered filmmaking, there was like a fire that got lit, that is just, I am so grateful to find a passion, and yes, there's a lot of things I struggle with, but to have that is so special. And I recognize that, and I take that very seriously. It's a responsibility. And, I feel like film can be a very important part of healing. You know, I think it can be a way of helping people. And so it's not easy, and it's like a struggle, and there's no guaranteed income in the way that I'm doing it, but I get so much out of it.
I don't know if you thought about this, but if you wouldn't have found that passion, the alternative life that you're living right now, if you would have stuck with occupational therapy, who do you think you would be right now?
It's so hard to say.
Yeah.
It's really hard to say. I don't know. It's like sometimes you meet a person and they just like never figured out what they wanted to do in life, and they just sort of live kind of passively, or maybe they end up like really bitter. Maybe like that. I don't know.
Maybe a better way to ask that is what is the best thing about, or the great things about finding your passion? What do you think it brings to your life that you have that people who have not found something like that maybe don't have?
I definitely don't want to speak for other people because obviously their experience is, you know, different.
Yeah.
But I just feel like I have a purpose, you know? That's like a very important feeling. You know, maybe other people don't need that. I don't know. But I like finding meaning in things, you know? I like feeling like I'm living a meaningful life. I want to feel like I'm contributing, not making the world a worse place, you know, in my very little way.
When you think about the rest of your career, maybe to shorten it up, like the next few years, what do you want to do? I know you mentioned this project that you're tinkering on, but what's a great next few years look like for you, ideally?
Well, I would definitely like to feel like more stable, you know, in terms of income, you know, just because I think that like is good for the creative mind to not like have to like think about those things.
Yeah.
But I don't need to be the director of every project. You know, I love collaborating. So much of filmmaking for me actually is very alone. So anytime I can jump on a project that I care about because I care about the topic or like I think it's beautifully told or whatever, I'm very excited for. I love seeing great movies and championing those movies. You know, nothing makes me happier than like other movies that are excellent getting out there and having success. That makes me very, very happy. So I just like being part of that whole world. And yeah, I just want to keep doing it as much as I can.
I don't know if any come to mind, but the truly excellent movies you've seen, what are they? I'd be particularly interested if they're not ones most people have ever heard of before.
Like from recent time or just of all time?
Of all time.
Of all time. Let me think for a second.
Okay.
Besides Donnie Darko. I think that's just like a personal one, but I guess they're all sort of, I think everyone should see the movie All About Eve. That's a great film. There's a doc called Secret Mall Apartment that everyone should see.
I just saw that.
It's so good.
It's really good. Yeah.
I love that. And that reminds me of the doc I'm working on now a little bit. What else? Grey Gardens from the 70s. Have you heard of that?
No, I don't think so.
So ever hear of the Maisel brothers?
No.
They kind of like, quote unquote, invented cinema verite, which is this documentary style of following people around in their lives instead of being like figureheads being interviewed.
Yeah. And
they made this documentary called Grey Gardens, and Term Circle always kind of gets compared to that a little bit. And if I did not, and it's about these cousins of like Jacqueline and Kennedy Onassis, and like they live in this dilapidated mansion in the Hamptons.
Yes,
and they just are like living their lives, and it's kind of crazy, and it's just like movies about marginalized people. Like that movie allowed me to think I can make a movie about my parents. You know, Breaking the Waves, excellent film. There's so many good movies.
I think the documentary about the Onassis cousins was recently playing at like the Lincoln Film Center. I almost saw it. I'm almost certain that I read about that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a place. It's still gets an audience, that movie. You should definitely see it.
What makes, in the experience you've had so far, like what makes a great documentary filmmaker? In addition to really caring, I mean, there's no way that projects like this would get done without a ton of persistence. What else? What have you learned really helps to make a great film?
Well, I think, for me, it has to have like an emotional, center. It has to like move me emotionally in some way, like it's, it takes you out of the experience of just, living and brings like another thought, and I love those deeper experiences like that. Like, and I love people, and just like understanding people. That's that's endlessly fascinating to me. And documentary can do that in a way I think that fiction can't do so, perfectly because, it's the artifice of it, but I love fiction filmmaking. But documentary is just kind of like, you can see the real, like, stripped down version of people. I think it's really fascinating.
You started this conversation by saying something really interesting about how all kids are artists, because at that point in their life, they're the most authentic version of themselves oftentimes, and that there's this conformity and molding that happens in some ways for good reason, but in some ways that kind of conformity can lead to people losing their own ability to think independently, to know what they want, to have preferences that are a little weird, that won't be accepted by other people. And you mentioned about how you use the phrase being interested in these documentaries that feature marginalized people who are often a little strange. I don't know if you've thought about this too, but is that also part of the beauty of documentary films to you? Is the profiling of non-normal people in an authentic, real, often very raw way?
Yeah, I think it's like an access that you don't usually get in life. Like, even if you know someone, like, right, in like life, you might not go over their apartment. You might not like know how they really live. And so if someone grants you that access to share their life or whatever they're doing, that's a really special thing.
Were your parents worried about giving you that kind of access? And your family generally? I don't want to make it sound like it's just your parents, because your sisters are in there too.
They are all, special and unique in their own way in terms of the way that they like have a relationship with this movie. Not even I understand what it is like to be a subject of a documentary. Because even though people say I'm in it and I made it, and
not really.
I am the observer in this movie.
Yeah.
And for someone to be able to see themselves that way, it's like a very intense experience. And it's not just one emotion. It's like a roller coaster. But the brilliant thing about everyone in my family is that they could see the things that make them vulnerable or, not always the best light, but recognize how it's something worth sharing, that the truth is worth sharing. It's a purpose beyond oneself. And everyone was sort of understanding about that. And there was I showed them an edit like, a year or so before it came out, and no one had any notes. No one made me change anything.
I'm shocked.
Yeah.
How about once it was available for other people to watch? I don't know what their reaction in general, the family, was, but
it's just a part of that process. Like it's one of the outside things that, early on when I was filming was I would go, well, this is exploitative. Sometimes when you hear about movies about, marginalized people, like, oh yeah, but you're exploiting their train wreck situation or something. And I'm like, well, then so what? So we don't make movies about people with mental health problems, because that's like a big part of the population.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to talk about things, and we need to allow people to have agency to tell their stories. I was able to tell, each of my family's members' story in the way in this movie that I think they felt their voice was heard, you know? And I think that's important. It's not about, I didn't sensationalize anyone's issues. And I think there's a way to do these things where, like, you know, you don't have to exploit. The person that's calling it exploitative is actually doing the exploiting. Like, you were the one creating a stigma and an issue where, like, it's just toppling on to something that, like, is distracting from what we really need to be talking about.
Which are the people themselves who are living with this?
Yeah.
You just mentioned the importance of talking about mental illness, and really it's your mom and your sister to some degree, I guess. Are there other themes? If you could snap your finger and have 1,000 lives where you could be working on even more projects right now, are there other themes in our culture, in our society right now that you think deserve the focus of a documentary film that you haven't seen before on screen or haven't seen done well? I don't know if anything comes to mind, but
yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, there's so many movies out there.
Yeah.
I just think it's just, you know, the individual perspective that comes with that. Like, everyone has their own lens. Like, you can make a movie about a topic and there'll be a million different stories about it. And that's what's so great. And what really, you know, drew me to filmmaking is that, like, you can make so many movies. Like, no movie is going to be the same. You could, you know, go into mental health, like, in every movie, and every movie will be different. Every movie will be different. You know, you put in a different genre, you put it in a different, like, you know, actor, different, you know, documentary subject. Every movie is going to be different. You know, there's something to learn from each of them.
Yeah. We talked about this very briefly in the conversation. I always like to bring up success with guests that I talk to, and maybe it's already your current life and that's like you're living that success right now. But in your career in general, how do you think about that word for yourself?
Yeah, I think it's just about making an impact in, like, whatever small, you know, I one time had a screening where just one person was there and then just like, but like they were very moved and like they loved it and they went on and shared it with their family. And it's like, you know what? That's really awesome. So yeah, just, I don't know, making an impact.
The clarity that it sounds like you got post Donnie Darko.
Yeah.
Is that still there?
Yes. Where I probably would have moved on to something else. Yeah. I still really, really want to make movies, like desperately. Like, I'm always just like chasing that.
Is there also just the joy in the work itself, like the day in and day out? Just emotionally, I'd love to hear about what a great work day looks and feels like to you.
Yeah, well, it can take various forms. You know, I love writing. If I have a good writing day, I think there's no high quite like that, you know? And then there's like being on set, and that can be an amazing day. And like you also are using your body physically, you're like interacting with other people. And like when that goes well, and like, or you like, you know, like when you got something, you know, and that's a feeling. And then there's like being able to step back and seeing a finished movie. There's just so many endless parts of this process that are very fulfilling. And I like all of it.
I know you've been in the New York film scene for quite a while. I don't know if anyone comes to mind with this question, but who are the great filmmakers you admire who are here that are not mainstream in American consciousness, but you regard as truly excellent at what they do?
That are still alive?
Even if they're not.
Stanley Kubrick is a big one. I think his films are exceptional, and you can watch them over and over again. Billy Wilder, the entire Maisels team, you know? Yeah, I'm not I know there are more. They're not just coming to me this second.
For sure.
Yeah. Oh, Deborah Granick. I remember seeing, you know who that is?
I don't.
She made the film Winter's Bone, which sort of launched Jennifer Lawrence's career. And I remember just being blown away by that movie. You should see it.
Okay.
And you think like Deborah Granick, she made that film, and she also made this film Down to the Bone starring Vera Farmiga before that. And you would think like her career would be set up at that point. Like, and it wasn't. Like she still struggles, which is like heartbreaking, but very real, you know?
I'd love to close with a question I often like to ask, which is, it's about basically knowledge and wisdom and advice that you would give the post Donnie Darko self in your early 20s who wants to break into this world and make things, to make movies. And maybe this is also well asked to frame it in the advice you would give to a friend who's starting out their career and wants to be a documentary filmmaker and a filmmaker in general. What's important advice to give to someone like that? What have you learned that's worth sharing, that's worth people considering?
If you're a little scared to do it, it's probably a good idea.
Yeah.
You have to push yourself. You know, if you want to make art worth something, it's going to have to like push you.
What do you mean by that? Being intimidated? Being...
Oh, yes. But like, for example, with Charm Circle, that's terrifying to put a movie out about your family.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many levels of like, you know, anxiety, rejection, like emotion, you know, like vulnerability, like there, but it's like, that's the stuff that matters. And I think that's across the board where work matters in all sorts of fields, you know? And, you know, say yes to like a lot of stuff. Like, you know, you never know like what it's going to bring about.
Love it. Thank you.
Thank you.